Okay, today we're going to look at the second part of Chapter 7, which is Theories of Motivation. And where we looked at content theories of motivation last week, this week we're going to look at process theories of motivation, or how motivation works in the workplace. So in order to do that, we're going to look at three different theories, actually four, if we look at the job characteristics model. We're going to look at expectancy theory, equity theory, and goal setting theory. So process theories do explain how things work, how motivation occurs in the workplace, and why people with a particular need behave in a certain way, and how this translates how this translates into behavior. But process theories of motivation do not address the issue of why needs exist. So that's the difference between content and process theories. So the first one we're going to talk about or look at is expectancy theory. And expectancy theory basically says, if I put the effort into something, can I do it? What's it worth? Is it worth doing? So it's, if we put something in, what do we get from it? Is it something that's desirable? So this theory is useful because it gives us an explanation for why people in the workplace demonstrate different levels of work effort, because it's based on, according to this model, what they think they're going to get out of it. So it's important in terms of organizational behavior, because if we know what motivates employees, we can hopefully do things and set into place processes that will keep our employees. So how it works. Basically, there are three different levels or parts to this particular model. And it basically says, do we have the skills to accomplish the task? And that's known as the effort to performance level. Do we have what it takes to lead to a certain outcome? Will the performance lead to a certain outcome, the performance to the outcome? And is the outcome worth the effort? Is it something that is desirable? What is the valence or the value of this outcome for us? So effort to performance, performance to outcome, and valence or the values. So it's three different steps. It's a three-part process. So in order to increase the effort to performance expectancy in step one, the can I do this or can you do it, you have to increase the belief that the employees can do the job successfully. So employees base their expectations at this level of effort to performance on self-efficacy and previous experiences. So the development of competencies is necessary to increase at this level of effort to performance. So in the workplace, in order to do this, this particular focus would be on training, would be on creating an environment that has the adequate resources, on clarifying people's roles, and providing coaching and feedback. I'm trying to adjust the lighting here so you can see me better. Okay, so that would be creating that right kind of environment, selecting employees, so the correct selection in recruitment and so on and so forth. So once you have that in place, how do you increase the performance to expectancy outcome? What will you get for doing this? So increasing the belief that good performance will result in something that's valued, a value, a reward. And this can be done, and only in certain tasks, by being able to measure the performance accurately and being able to adequately explain the link between rewards and past performance, linking the performance to the outcomes. So, for example, giving a bonus at a holiday period of time. I can remember at work a number of years ago, the company I worked for gave everyone certificates for turkeys at Christmas time, but they didn't tie it to any level of performance. So people were given out these vouchers, but it wasn't dependent on any sort of work situation. Therefore, people didn't think that they had to work for this, and it wasn't particularly motivating. A downside and an interesting side to that is that the following year, when they didn't do the same thing, when they didn't hand out the bonuses, people were really upset. So in the end, it actually had a negative effect without having any positive effect at the front end. So measuring performance accurately, some jobs that can be done, some jobs it can't be done. And explaining that link is key in this particular level. But is it enough? What is the value? Maybe I already had a turkey in the freezer in that case, if they had linked it, in which case it wouldn't have been of value to me. So values and values are the price that we place on these outcomes. What's it worth? So these can be individualized, so they fit people's personal needs. So what might be good for one person might not be good for another. I think I talked in the last session about if it was a gym membership, that wouldn't be something valued for me, and in fact could be not motivating or demotivating. So I deviate from the book chapter a little bit in this segment, and I talk about in the PowerPoints the types of organizational rewards that are out there that could be appealing to people. And the first are membership and seniority based rewards, and that means that what you get is based on the amount of time you've been with the organization, or your membership, or your employment with the particular organization. So this could be time off. This could be bidding for vacation time. These are based on how long you've been with the organization. Pay could be based on seniority if you get incremental pay. So that's one level. Job status-based rewards are another type of organizational reward, and those are rewards that go with the job itself. So a job status reward is not an individual thing, but it's something that you have when you're in that position and something you won't have when you're not. So an example of that could be a company car, a membership into a health club, again, for example, a particular parking space or a particular office because this is the position you hold, this is the office that you have. So again, a different type of reward, but something that could be valued. Competency-based rewards are another level, so it's based on what competencies you bring to the job. So if you have a certain set of skills, then you might get paid for that. So for example, in Europe, I travel to Finland a lot, and you see that people in the various shops and working for Finnair, the airline as well, will have a little badge on that will show a flag, and the flags represent the languages of the country that they speak. So those would be competencies, and if they were rewarded for those, then that would be a competency-based reward based on a skill they bring. Performance-based rewards would be rewards based on bonuses for what you might do, so your level of performance, if you go above and beyond. We can think back to Frederick Taylor and the bonuses for doing more than the required amount. So those would be based on bonuses based on performances that go beyond what is typified. Okay, so those would be those rewards. And those are something to think about in terms of expectancy theory. Now, as we said, there are some limitations of expectancy theory, and basically it doesn't explain how somebody might have a particular need, for example, but works against that goal, that's something that's desired. So spontaneous counterintuitive behavior. So you know, for example, that if you don't study, this is the example I give in the PowerPoints, that you may not do particularly well in a test, yet you still don't study, even though you want to do well, and that is the reward. So what explains that? Well, expectancy theory doesn't offer an explanation for that, so that's one of the drawbacks of it. And there might be countervailant awards, norms that prevent employees from working to their full potential. So again, we can go to the human relations approach, and we look at Elton Mayo, and we look at if people overworked or overproduced what they should have been doing, or even in scientific management theory, then they weren't rewarded for it because they were breaking the norms of the workplace. So expectancy theory is based on an extrinsic, where the rewards are given to you, reward system. So the rewards may become devalued over time. You may get used to having them and no longer are they motivating because they're just not of interest. So it's not coming from within, it's not an intrinsic reward, it's extrinsic, and we know that over time those can become devalued. So that's one process theory of motivation. The next one is one that we're quite familiar with, whether or not we think about it or name it at the time, and that's equity theory. And basically, equity theory, which is a process theory, explains how people perceive fairness in comparison to another person. So we compare ourselves in terms of whether we feel we're being treated equitably in comparison to what somebody else might be getting. And if we don't, there are various outcomes, and there are various ways that we also, and I'll put in quotes, measure that equity. So it explains behavior when we feel inequitably treated and how that influences our motivation. So the elements of this are that it's based on an input to output ratio. So we look at what we're contributing compared to what someone else contributes and compared to what the outcomes are for ourselves or that comparison other, the person we compare our ratio to. So what we contribute can be in terms of skill, in terms of time, in terms of effort, and what we receive in return for that. Do we receive recognition? Do we receive pay? Do we get an intrinsic self-esteem motivator? So we usually pick someone that we can easily find out information about, or someone who's in a comparable position, someone that we can form this comparison to. And then we form what we call this equity evaluation. So I've given you a video on monkeys and equity theory, which is sort of fun to watch. Even monkeys use equity theory. But our motivation is dependent on how we view our comparison other. And it can be a generalized comparison, but there are different types of inequity that we look at. And typically, we'll focus on under-reward inequity for ourselves. So under-reward means that we look at or over-reward on behalf of another person. Sorry, let me rephrase that. So over-reward inequity, we would look at the other person, and we would look at what they get, and we would look at our reward equity in comparison to what we get. So for example, if we put in the same time and effort as someone else, and we get very little back, but somebody else gets praise for what they've done. So we work for 2 hours beyond our scheduled time, and we don't get any praise back for it, and somebody else works the same, and they get much more praise for it, then we're going to see that we're being under-rewarded. And there will be outcomes that we'll talk about. Likewise, if we compare ourselves to others with the same input and they get less back and we get more back, we're also going to feel inequity, but it's going to be that we feel that we've been over-rewarded. So these all have consequences. So when we compare ourselves to others, we can perceive this inequity. If we perceive this inequity, we're probably going to be motivated to reduce it by doing one of a number of different things. So we can change our inputs. If we feel that we're being under-rewarded, we might put less effort in. If we feel it's not worth it and we're not being treated equitably, we might think, well, we'll put less effort into that. We might try to change our outcomes. If we feel we're being under-rewarded, we might ask for a raise if we feel we're not getting enough pay. We may change our perceptions. We may think about what we've done and say, well, okay, we'll try to rationalize what it is so that it seems more equitable in our mindset. Or we may, in the same type of idea, change our comparison other. So I might think, well, okay, I'm comparing, if I were to compare my input and outcome in terms of salary with someone at a university in a different city where the pay rates are higher, I might think that that's not a fair comparison, so I might change my comparison other and compare myself to someone a little closer to home or in a similar sized institution. I could act on the comparison other and say, well, okay, you're putting too much effort in, don't do this, or can you cut back, or can you increase your effort so that it seems more equitable to reduce that dissonance. Or sometimes in extreme circumstances, if I feel that I'm really being treated unfairly, I could leave the job. And you can see where then this has serious consequences on motivation. So the drawbacks to this theory are that this theory, equity theory, doesn't indicate which inputs or outcomes are most valued. It does show us, though, that pay alone is not a motivator. It shows us the value of intrinsic motivation. But importantly, the focus is on dissatisfaction and inequity. So it's not looking at satisfaction in this case. The focus is on dissatisfaction. And the model assumes that all individuals are rational and selfish. Maybe some people don't mind the inequity, but it doesn't take that into account. And it doesn't account for cross-cultural differences in more egalitarian societies, and it doesn't explain employee turnover and workplace hostility. That is something that's still left untouched. So those are the two main models. Goal setting as a motivator is also talked about, and I don't think that I really need to go through that. Goal setting makes goals clear so people know what they're working for. But related to that is motivating through job design so that jobs are considered both intrinsically and extrinsically motivating. So we've looked at some of them throughout this term: job specialization, which is something that scientific management was very big on, where people are specialized in one aspect of the job. These aren't actually talked about too much in the chapter either, so this is important. Job rotation, moving from one aspect of the job to another so that people don't get bored. Job enlargement, and that means increasing the number of tasks that people perform within a job. It doesn't mean enriching the job. Job enrichment is something different again. It's still increasing the number of tasks performed, but in so doing, it's giving employees more autonomy and more responsibility for what they're doing. So that is the slight difference in that. And the key of the job redesign strategies, at least for this term, is Hackman and Oldham's job characteristics model. So there's a nice diagram in the PowerPoints. And the first one is skill variety. So the number of different skills and abilities or talents that are required to do the job. So in terms of adding skill variety, what could you add to an existing job that would give it enough variety, that breaks away from specialization, that would lead to people experiencing these critical psychological states that would result in people feeling more motivated. So what sorts of skills could you add to a job that was pretty narrowly defined that would increase this? Likewise, task identity. Task identity means the completion of a whole or identifiable piece of work that's required by the job. So something from beginning to end. So for example, when I worked in the reservations office of Air Canada many years ago, we would do just reservations, and somebody else would do ticketing, and then of course there would be flight attendants and pilots, and things would follow through. So they actually introduced a model that was something like Hackman and Oldham's job characteristics model, and they said, well, we want to give people more autonomy, more responsibility. So they increase the task significance, or the task identity rather, they increase the significance too, so that we were able to do something from start to finish. So we would make the reservations, and then we would do the follow-up with the passenger later. The Volvo plant in Sweden, when they introduced, went against assembly line work, and such as Saturn has done as well, or did in the past, where a team of people completed a vehicle from start to finish. That was a form of task identity. So something that was required from start to finish so you could have identifiable piece of work, and that would be more motivating than just doing one bit of it and being a cog in the wheel and not seeing what was going to happen at the end. And it also gave more autonomy as well. Task significance refers to the impact of the job on the lives of other people, the immediate organization or the environment. So some jobs have more task significance than others, and what can you do to make a job more task significant depending on what the job is. So the impact of an airline pilot, for example, is quite significant on other people. How does it rank in terms of a heart surgeon? We can see some of the differences. So what are some things that can be done to make people realize that what they're doing in the task and the job they're carrying out plays a significant role in the lives of other people? So what can be done to increase that if you've got that particular factor? Autonomy, of course, refers to responsibility. So how much responsibility does the job have? How can you add elements of autonomy to a job to give people some control over the pace of the work they do or the procedures that are to be used. So how much flexibility do they have in doing something? Can it be done this way, or can it deviate from the norm? Some jobs are more amenable to autonomy than others, or different kinds of autonomy. So that's something to think about. And feedback, the amount of information about the effectiveness of the performance that goes back to people. Again, that ties into motivational theory. How much feedback do you get, and what do you do with that feedback?